There's plenty of
No, I had the
You
same.
do? Okay. All
I had
right.
the same feelings.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming out today. I'm Lovell Pratt, and on behalf of the San Juan Islanders for Safe Shipping and the San Juan's Alliance, I want to welcome you here today. A few just basic logistics here at the Grange Hall. There are bathrooms out the door and to your left. And is everybody comfortable in terms of the temperature? Is this okay? We're warm enough. We had to heat up the room to get started here, but I think it's good for now. I really appreciate your coming out here today, and we have some great speakers here to present to you. I just wanted to put in a couple of words. First of all, tell you about the work of San Juan Islanders for Safe Shipping, which is based here on San Juan Island. And we have two of the founding members here today, Sean Hubbard here in the back, and Louisa Nishitani. Where'd Louisa go?
Louisa is the founding member.
Yes, and so she's here with us today too. So, and there's an email sign-up sheet in the back if you want to be on the email list and get more information and updates, opportunities to attend events or to provide comments on different projects that are being proposed. Then there's a sign-up sheet in the back. There's also a sign-up sheet for Islands Oil Spill Association, and Julie will be talking more about that if people are interested in getting some training and learning more about how to volunteer and help respond to the spill. You know, we're holding these presentations. There was one on Lopez Friday and yesterday on Orcas, and here today we're recognizing the 25th anniversary of the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And this is a spill that still hasn't been completely cleaned up and is still impacting the economy and the environment up there in Alaska. And we certainly don't want a major spill like that happening here and impacting our community. And so really the only way to deal with an oil spill is to prevent it from ever happening. So that's definitely the focus of the groups that are working on these issues here. It's been almost 20 years since we've had a major spill in the island, in the waters surrounding San Juan County. But certainly the possibility of a spill is always there, and we're very fortunate to have the Islands Oil Spill Association and the state that do a great job in terms of prevention and response. But especially given all the projects that are being proposed, the new terminals that are being proposed, and the expanded refineries, and the tremendous increase in vessel traffic, there's a tremendous increase in risk of a major oil spill in the waters surrounding our islands. And there was, in 2012, there was an update to our oil spill contingency plan, and they estimated that it would cost our state $10.8 billion in annual economic activity and the loss of 165,000 jobs if we were to have a major oil spill. So clearly this is something we want to prevent at all costs. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker today. We're really fortunate to have Gary Shikanaka here. He's a biologist with NOAA's Emergency Response Division based in Seattle, but he also has a home on Lopez, so he's an islander too. He's provided biological expertise during spills of oil and hazardous chemicals in the U.S. and internationally for more than 2 decades. And he was part of the scientific team that responded to the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill in Alaska, overseeing long-term monitoring and experimental work focusing on the effects of oil and cleanup. And with that, I'd like to welcome Gary.
As Lovell mentioned, Julie and I have been doing this road show, through the islands the last 3 days, and so I was thinking maybe you could give my talk today.
Yeah.
We've listened to our talks the last 3 days, so why don't you give my talk and I'll talk about ISA at the end.
My ability to understand everything that you said is so much better yesterday than before.
Well, there you go.
It's really reinforced a lot.
Well, I'm pleased to be here. Like Lovell said, I've got a little place on Lopez, and so the islands are near and dear to my heart, and all of you folks are kind of at the at ground zero for a lot of what we've been calling emerging oil spill risks. So today what I'd like to do is simply try to give you some information about what we know and what we don't know, a little bit of history on the spills that have already taken place and what to expect, and hopefully that'll set the stage for Julie to talk about the capabilities that IOSA bring to the island. So see if I can figure out the PC, and you know, I've got two, yeah, much better than the other places. I've got two pop science fiction references in my talk, and do any of you know what this is from? There's a link to
Alien.
There you go. Okay, it's a science fiction movie called Alien, and you know, the guy in the center there is actually an ex-Lopesian, Tom Skerritt. I sort of have viewed these new risks that we've encountered in the oil spill world as being similar to the critter in this movie. It, you know, pops up out of nowhere and then keeps changing and kind of getting worse as time goes on. So I also think it's important for us to understand how we got here. So it seems like many of you, if not most of you, kind of remember 1979 and the gas shortages that we encountered in the United States. As a side note, you know, people realized that that changed the economics of beer, but there was much hand-wringing associated with the fact that we were so dependent on foreign oil, and particularly oil from the Middle East. So a whole progression of presidents, beginning with Nixon and actually continuing beyond the second Bush into Obama, talked a lot about energy independence, this notion that we need to cut ourselves off from so-called foreign oil, and specifically oil from the Middle East. And much to at least my personal surprise, it actually has been slowly occurring. We have reduced our dependence on foreign oil. This is a graph produced by the White House, and they're happy to point out that since Obama's been in office, that dependence on foreign oil has really been steadily declining. The other part of this graph is the fact the blue shows kind of the same thing, but the other part of the equation is the orange, and the orange shows you domestic oil production. So that's been steadily increasing over the same period of time. So what is this new domestic oil production that we're talking about? This is one piece of it. These are the tar sands in Alberta. Like many large-scale resource extractions, it's not very pretty. This is basically strip mining the tar sands, and we'll talk about how it gets processed in a little bit. The net result has been a boom in Canadian oil production. They're sitting on vast reserves of these tar sands, and their production has been increasing steadily. And you can see that this graph points out that between 2000 to 2009, production doubled, and it continues to go up. This is the other part of that equation. This you must know, have heard this term, fracking. Again, here's the second science fiction reference. It comes up, actually, if you look up fracking online, the Urban Dictionary makes reference to the fact that that term was used in a science fiction television show called Battlestar Galactica, and it meant nothing what it really means now with respect to oil production. This is a graphic that shows you a little bit about how fracking works. They use it for both production of natural gas and oil. So the idea is you drill down until you hit a layer that contains either gas or oil, and then the line goes horizontally into that reserve. They do just some small explosions down there to fracture the substrate, and then pump in fracking fluids and something called proppants to hold the cracks open, and then they pump the gas and the oil out along with the water that they used originally, the fracking water. So another one of these graphs, and you'll see a lot of them during my talk that show kind of this near exponential increase over time. This shows the increase and the projected increase in domestic oil production out of these oil shales through the use of fracking. The blue that you see here is from the Bakken reserves in North Dakota. Those are the ones that we're most concerned about here in the Pacific Northwest, but there's also a big reserve in Texas called the Eagle Ford Reserve that is increasing its production as well pretty steadily through fracking. So this is what I want to touch on primarily today, and to again tell you what I know, what I think we know, and what we don't know. So we'll talk about the tar sands, or the polite term is oil sands products for tar sands. It sounds less dirty. And then Bakken crude oil, and then coal. I think many of you are very familiar with the coal issue, but we'll touch on that a little bit because there have been some recent developments, at least in my world, that may be of interest to you. So all of these so-called emerging risks have been featured pretty prominently in the news, and you hear about them a lot. So from the Keystone XL pipeline to the train explosion in Quebec, to the largest freshwater oil spill in U.S. history, and to the vast increases in transport of coal out of Montana. These are things that are sort of in the background of what we hear in the news. As far as tar sands, oil sands products go, these 6 terms I think are the most important things for you to take away today. If you have some sense of what these 6 things mean, then you have a pretty good handle on the basis for the issues related to tar sands and oil sands products. So when we talk about oil sands, that's what you saw them strip mining in that early shot. It's the raw material, basically. And as the name indicates, it's a mixture of oil and sand and also water. Bitumen is the heavy oil that's in those tar sands. It's a thick product. That's because it's actually a crude oil that's been partially degraded by natural processes, by microbes mainly. So what you have left over is a very heavy, sticky kind of material. Now to get that heavy, sticky material, the bitumen, to move, you have to cut it with something, you have to dilute it. And so that's what a diluent is. So they mix it with a lighter oil material, usually a natural gas condensate, which is a byproduct of the production of natural gas. And so that makes it more fluid. They can put it in pipelines, load it onto trains, and that's important for getting it to market. And then the last 3 items are the major mixed products that you'll hear about being transported. Dilbit is mixture of diluent and bitumen. Synbit, I always stumble a little bit with this because it's bitumen mixed with synthetic crude oil. And what is synthetic crude oil? My understanding, it is a partially refined bitumen product. So up in Alberta, they take out the heaviest stuff in the bitumen, and they get a more fluid material that they can then mix with bitumen to get it to flow. And then, of course, there's Synbit, which is a combination of bitumen and synthetic crude oil and a diluent to make it even more fluid. So the terminology, that's important for understanding what the issues are. This is what the raw tar sands product looks like. First night on Lopez, somebody mentioned that he sees this all the time on his farm, but it's not the same thing. This is a diagram of what that guy is holding. The green represents the bitumen product, the oil. The yellow is sand, and the blue is water. So you've got three components in the tar sands, which are oil, sand, and water. Then if you take out the sand and water, you wind up with a very thick kind of product like this. You can see it's even thicker than molasses, and what the idea by processing it further and adding in the diluent, you want to get something like that so that you can get it to flow in a pipeline and load it on trains and move it out to markets. So that's the whole the basis behind processing the bitumen. And then the network of pipelines. Many of you probably have seen a lot of maps like this. It shows the extensive pipeline network that's already in place across most of North America. The dotted lines indicate the proposed projects. The diagonal right there shows the Keystone XL proposal. And then you see dotted lines running from Edmonton to Anacortes. And that's Kinder Morgan's proposals to expand capacity in existing pipelines to Anacortes. So there have been spills of this stuff. And I should pause for a moment and tell you that if you guys have any questions, please feel free just to jump in. You know, we're not a formal group or anything, and we try to hold them till the end, and you'll forget them. And
on your last slide,
yeah,
is that one up there going to Kirimac? Is that the Northern Gateway?
yes, yes. Yeah, that's certainly been a hot issue in Canada. And I frankly, maybe some of you know the status of where we are with that, whether the Energy Board is still considering that project. All right, so spills of oil sands products. I just wanted to attach some images to what this stuff looks like when it gets out into the environment. The very earliest one that we're aware of occurred actually in our area in British Columbia, and it was a construction accident. It was a pipeline onshore that got punctured by a front-end loader, I think, and it spilled dill synbit. So you remember dill synbit is a mixture of diluent and synthetic crude and bitumen. About half of the spilled amount went into the water. I'll show you just one image of that in a second. The big one was the Enbridge-Kalamazoo River spill in 2010, the largest freshwater spill in U.S. history. Almost 1 million gallons. Actually, it's projected to be over 1 million gallons. Enbridge is disputing that total, but I think it's pretty clear that it's over 1 million gallons. There was another less well-known Enbridge spill that happened in the same year. Both of these things happened, remember, with the BP spill going on at the same time. So in 2010, Enbridge had two fairly significant spills that sort of got lost in the news coverage because BP was occurring in the Gulf of Mexico. So Romeoville, Illinois is kind of a suburban area near Chicago, and so a very different kind of environment than we're thinking of. But still, it gives us an example of what happens with this stuff. Here are a couple of images. The top one is of the Burrard Inlet spill in British Columbia in 2007. It dribbled in from the land and was relatively well contained. It was recovered using the traditional methods that we use for spill response on the water, things like skimmers and sorbent materials. They did try a chemical shoreline cleaner to get some of this stuff out of the beaches. But it was a relatively small incident, and not too much of it got away from them and into the open waters.
What do you mean by chemical shoreline Peter, or not bioremediation, you're talking about something
It-
to run?
Yeah, it's another variant on chemical dispersants, although they don't disperse. They're designed to mobilize oil off of like a beach, but keep it floating so that it can be recovered. So,
A light.
yeah, it's a mixture of surfactants and petroleum distillates, much like a dispersant. But again, the whole idea is to not let it go into the water column, but keep it on the surface.
Did this sink or did it help?
As far as we know, as far as I know, it floated. This was, I think, in talking to the Washington Department of Ecology people, it was a relatively successful, as successful as we get with cleaning up an oil spill. But remember, it was relatively small. I mean, 20,000 gallons is still a lot of oil, but on the scale that we've been dealing with, it's relatively small. The bottom two shots show Romeoville, Illinois. Again, oiled birds. A lot of this oil went, oddly enough, into a sewage treatment plant from the pipeline break. But it was a lot of oil. It was some 200,000 gallons. And, but again, didn't get outside of containment areas.
Excuse me, Gary?
Yeah,
The Burnaby spill,
yeah.
because it was dill cinder, it was to be distinguished from the still bit, right? In terms of, wasn't it as a, the product would be less likely to sink, wouldn't it?
Well, that's sort of the $64 million question for all of these tar sands products is it going to float or is it going to sink? And I don't know if having that synthetic crude in there makes it less likely to sink or not.
Is it less likely to disassociate? I mean, I thought once you have the lighter fractions come off of the diluent, then you're more likely to have the heavier oils then sink.
That's correct. And so the issue that we'll get to in just a bit is it has to do with that diluent piece. The concern, and it seems like a lot of the empirical laboratory evidence that's coming out from recent studies is that diluent part of the mixture comes off pretty quickly in the environment. So especially if you put it out in a warm environment, like for example what happened in Michigan, that was in the middle of the summer, you expose it to the sun, then that diluent piece comes off and you're left with basically the bitumen component. So is that going to sink or not? Some of the bitumens, the raw bitumens, are just below sinking density, and some of them actually are denser than water, so they could sink. I've been having this argument with some of the other folks in my group in NOAA back in Seattle. It doesn't float or doesn't sink, and when it's fresh, typically these dilbit mixtures float. They're about the same density as other crude oils, but I think they behave differently, and that's the key piece here that we need to think about.
They behave in that they disassociate more quickly?
Yeah, quickly and maybe differently. You can get what the stubborn people in Seattle keep telling me is you can get almost any crude oil to sink if you put enough rocks in it, if you put enough sediment in it. The question is whether something like a dilbit is more susceptible to taking on sediment, or whether it happens more quickly. So that's the operative question that I don't know that we can really answer yet, but it's certainly a concern.
Gary?
Yeah.
Whether it's crude oil or syncrude, when a heavy component sinks in deep cold water, biologically what happens? Does anybody know?
A heavy material, when it sinks in cold water,
Yeah.
my knee-jerk reaction is that it's going to persist.
No, I understand that, but the question is what happens to it biologically? Or what does it do biologically? When you have oil coming ashore on beaches, it's a highly productive area.
Yeah.
And we know it's toxic, and we know there are all sorts of bad things that happen. Question is, do we know what happens when oil sinks in deep water? What are the implications of oil sitting on the bottom in 400 feet?
Well, yeah, in deep water, well, that's a good question. And I hate to use our standard answer of it depends, but it sort of depends on what the area is. You know, we've got pretty good evidence that when they burned all that oil in the Gulf of Mexico, that the heavy burn residue that was left over sank. Very little of it, if any, was recovered. And that was in deep water, and pretty much people thought, well, that's not an issue. But it turns out that there is one deep water fishery that operates just north of the wellhead site, and that's the Royal Red Shrimp Fishery. They trawl at like 200 meters. And they started hauling up chunks of old oil. So the question was, is this burn residue? And it looks like it is. We're actually doing a study in NOAA with the Department of Interior to try to get a better handle on that. But it sort of depends on what area it's happening in and what the resources are. You know, if you get this heavy stuff on the bottom, it's generally not a good thing.
Does it show up in the shrimp?
Pardon me?
Does it show up in the shrimp?
No, the analyses that we did on the shrimp themselves the oil didn't show up in the shrimp, but it showed up on the shrimp in the trawl, because you were tumbling them with these tar balls, basically. So, let me tell you about these last two oil sands product spills. The first one is kind of a weird one, and it's related to the other way that they produce this stuff, and we can pass this around. This is tar sands oil. It's you can see it's kind of a weird mix. It's in water, and it looks like chunks in water, but that's fairly typical of how it comes up with the second means of production, and that's they inject steam down into the tar sands layer and then bring it up with the water. And so the water is called production water, and then the oil comes up looking like this. Now if you look at it, you see that's really thick, and you also can see that some of it is not floating very well. So it kind of typifies the issues that we see with the raw bitumen. So that's a way of introducing this first spill, which is kind of a weird one. Canadian Natural Resources Limited was steam injecting into a bitumen layer last year, and the bitumen started bubbling up to the surface just on its own, and it hasn't stopped. So that's why I have a question mark there. It started in May 2013, but as far as I know, it's still going on. And it's a lot of bitumen. It's 370,000 gallons so far. But it's in an isolated area. It's basically on land. It's on a First Nations reservation. It's also a Canadian military reservation. So the access isn't all that great. I have a couple pictures I'll show you in a second. Second one is one that made the news. It's another pipeline spill, this time an ExxonMobil pipeline spill in Arkansas. And it happened last March, just about a year ago. And this was another heavy crude oil that was classified as an oil sands product. Finally, it took some time to figure out what this stuff was, but it was finally, ExxonMobil said it was a tar sands oil. So here are a couple of pictures. The top two show you that, that bubbling bitumen reserve coming to the surface in Alberta, in Cold Lake. And they're just pumping it out as it comes to the surface. The bottom two show you the Mayflower, Arkansas spill. Again, a quiet suburban neighborhood. A lot of people live close to oil transportation pipelines, and they don't know it until something bad happens. This was something bad that happened. This, however, we're going back in time a little bit. This was kind of the granddaddy of them all. This was that Marshall, Michigan, or the Kalamazoo River spill. This is the 30-inch pipeline that broke in that incident. It's an Enbridge pipeline. Human error, like in so many of the spill incidents that we have, really played into this. The people who were monitoring this pipeline saw pressure drops, and they thought it was because there was a bubble in the pipeline. And instead of shutting the pipeline down, they decided, well, we'll clear the bubble by pushing more oil through. So this went on unabated for at least 17 hours and spilled, as we have seen, nearly 1 million gallons, if not more than 1 million gallons. This is a creek close to ground zero for the spill, near the pipeline break. It's been basically reconstructed twice because of the oil contamination. It's going to take a long time for this thing to come back. But there have been a whole number of other issues related to this spill, and this is where we get into the specter of sinking oil or sinking dilbit. And this is Morrill Lake. I'll show you the location in just a second on a map, but there's oil on the bottom of Morrill Lake, and they're continuing to recover it. This is from last summer. They're using what in the Gulf Coast are called marsh buggies to stir up the sediments, and then they're coming behind to try to capture whatever floats to the surface. Here's a map, and you can see here that the headline is "More dredging ordered at spill," but it's from last summer. The EPA ordered Enbridge to dredge basically 3 areas where known pockets of that sunken oil existed. And if you notice, they're in areas that are either deeper water, like Morrill Lake, or areas where in front of a dam where it permits the sediment to settle out. So that's what we're really seeing here. And so EPA ordered Enbridge to dredge these areas, and they were to be completed by the end of 2013. However, this is a headline from a month ago. Enbridge did not complete the work by the end of last year. They now project that they will get those areas dredged out by October of this year. So, you know, think about it, that this spill occurred in July 2010. It'll take more than 4 years to get that cleaned up.
And Gary, what's the cost to date?
The cost to date is over $1 billion, as I understand it. And obviously, it's continuing on. It's going up. So the specter of increased shipments of tar sands oil it's not limited to our area. This is a news article just from a couple of weeks ago, March 6th, you can see. And the Canada National Energy Board just approved what's called a line reversal in this pipeline that runs from Sarnia to Montreal. Originally it ran from east to west, and Enbridge finally got approval to reverse the flow to go west to east. Now why do you suppose that is? It's moving all that stuff that's out in the west to the east towards ports where it can be shipped. And you know, Montreal is likely not the last port that this is going to get shipped to, and there are lots of people on the U.S. East Coast who are concerned about this. This is a fact sheet produced by the Audubon Society. There's an Enbridge pipeline that connects Montreal to Portland, Maine, and Enbridge has been considering, I don't know if they've made the formal request, to reverse the flow in that pipeline. So you would move then basically the oil from Ontario to Portland, Maine, where it could then be loaded at that deep water port for shipping overseas. So that's the whole key to these these oil issues is getting the oil from where they are, where it's produced, to markets or refineries. And that's the whole transportation piece to this issue. In the last year or so, there have been a number of reports, studies looking at tar sands oil sands products. We were responsible for one. We actually commissioned a group of University of Washington grad students to take a first cut at pulling together a lot of disparate information that was out there in 2012 and putting it in one place. And they did a really fabulous job, and it was so nice that we decided to clean it up and claim it as our own. So they're still listed as authors here, though. And so they did a nice job. We just got that out last September, but it's a consolidation of materials that were available from other sources. There's nothing original in our document. The industry folks have been doing work to try to look at physical behavior of these tar sands oils, and this is one example. This is a Kinder Morgan sponsored project that took place up in Alberta in some tanks to look at how a couple of different tar sands oils behaved and then weathered, and the question, of course, lurking underneath is floating and sinking. And then at the end of last year, the Canadian federal government came out with its own report. You can see the end of November. This was long anticipated, finally was issued, and it's actually, as far as I can tell, a very nice technical look at how these things behave. So, at the top of the list for all of these reports, all of these studies is, does it float or not? And we've known for over a year, at least in the laboratory, that it floats. And so the initial industry studies that came out looked at the product as it's mixed, or as it's loaded into a pipeline or a rail car. So the fresh product, does it float or does it sink? It floats. And there have been a lot of industry experts in our area who say, this stuff, it looks just like crude oil. And that may be true. But even last year, these very sharp people at Inside Climate News, they won the Pulitzer Prize for their reporting on the Kalamazoo River spill, noted that, okay, the lab results show that it floats, but it sunk in Michigan. Now, one of the guys who testified up in Canada, this person, Al Mackey, who is a scientist who used to work for Exxon. We butted heads for a number of years over the Exxon Valdez oil spill. He was one of the scientists working that spill. He was asked to testify before the Canada Energy Board, and Al's a very colorful guy, and he's inclined to make colorful statements like this. It's an immutable fact of physics that they will float. They simply cannot sink in water. And as a scientist, you sort of you focus in on those absolute statements, and you realize this guy's going to be in trouble. And indeed, the Canadian federal report from Environment Canada indicated that, well, they do float initially, but if you mix them with sediment, as happens a lot in the environment, they'll sink. So, I hope this doesn't get back to Al Mackey, but it's just both of the statements are true. They float when they're fresh, but you put them out in the environment, let them weather, you mix them with sediments, they'll sink. And this is kind of interesting. This is, I took this out of a presentation that we saw in the local or the regional response team. It was a presentation by Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Certainly no green environmental intent there, but in their presentation, as they discussed shipment of some of these new products, even on the railroads, they note that if you see in the middle there, the red line, they say that dilbit floats and then sinks as the light ends volatilize. So I think it's relatively clear that we're talking about a couple of different things here. The physical characteristics of the fresh product, and then what happens to it once it gets out into the environment.
Question.
Yes?
If it's the addition of sediment that makes some of it sink, that seems like a guarantee that the material will be on our beaches before it sinks, because that's the place where we find sediment.
Well, also think about river delta areas. Freshwater inputs are laden with a lot of sediment. And so there are a number of unpleasant scenarios related to these products potentially getting into estuaries where the salinity changes. You know, things will float better on salt water than they do in fresh water. So you may have a product that's barely floating on the salt water, but then it gets into a river delta and then it goes down, and then as it passes through again, it'll pop up. But at the same time, it's going to be mixing with the sediment load in the river water. So, you know, it's just the complexities related to how this stuff might behave in our area, where we've got a lot of river and estuarine areas. It's going to be really hard to predict. It's going to be a nightmare for our modelers in Seattle, and I wouldn't expect they're going to be able to do a very accurate job of really predicting how this stuff is going to behave. At least until we have better information on it.
But if I got really local, so I'm now thinking that Burrard is just infinitely far away from here, and the ship coming around Turn Point smacks into something that's loaded with this stuff, and then it's dispersed over, you know, what we think of as deep water, that's relatively sediment-free compared to the river delta, then that stuff is going to show up on the beach mixing with beach gravels before it has a chance to really sink.
Yes, and that's pretty typical for not just these products, but for heavy fuel oils and heavier crude oils. You know, you get them into the surf zone where they mix on with the sediments close near shore to the beach, then they're gonna sink close to. And of course, Julie's going to show us her pet tar mat that she's been hauling around for the last 3 days in the back of her truck. So that's not an unlikely scenario that you'll see this oil mixing with beach gravel and beach sediments.
But Gary, we're just talking about the disassociation of the diluent from the bitumen.
Yeah.
So just if it's a nice sunny day, it could just cause that, just from evaporation, you could have sinking without having to be tied up with sediments.
That's correct, and that was one of the, you know, there were 2 or 3 industry-supported lab or tank studies that looked at what happens if you just take the dilbit product and you weathered it, you expose it to heat and sunlight, maybe raise the temperature a little bit in the water, and they couldn't get it to sink. But Environment Canada weathered it a little bit more, and they got it to exceed the density of water. So you're right, if you weather this stuff enough, you could conceivably get it back to its bitumen state where it would sink on its own, even without sediment. So there are policy issues, and many policy issues associated with this stuff, and this is the one I think that is the most, well, not the most obscure, but it's very obscure, but I think it's critically important. This is a memo from, of all people, the IRS, and you're wondering, who cares, first of all, what the IRS has to say, and secondly, what do they have to do with oil spills? Well, the IRS was asked by some unnamed company, and the name of the company was redacted from the memo, to rule on whether legally tar sands oil was oil. And the IRS made its ruling and said that no, it's not. So tar sands oil, you should all be relieved, it's not really oil. Now, what's the implication of that? It means that the shippers don't have to pay tax on it. And the tax is what funds oil cleanup. So the 8 cents per barrel tax that feeds the oil spill liability trust fund, the tar sands oils are exempt from that.
Has that been challenged?
Oh, look at that.
As far as I know, it
Mixed
hasn't.
with is, what is commingled with is taxable.
Where are you seeing, let's see.
The last sentence of that red one, outline. If it's mixed with another.
Oh, right, right. If you taint it with real oil, then it becomes oil. But the tar sands product themselves are not taxable. They don't pay into the oil spill liability trust fund. That's the bottom line. But the flip side of that coin is if there's a spill of this stuff, the cleanup is funded from the oil spill liability tax.
But you
Trust
can't
fund.
move it unless it's diluted or heated. So do they charge tax on the diluent portion, or do they charge tax on the whole volume once it's diluted?
My understanding is that dill bit is considered a tar sands oil, so it is not taxed. So the mixture is not taxed.
No, I don't think that's right.
That's not what it says, I don't think. I can barely read it.
It's just the actual bitumen. So it'd only be if it came in on heated rail cars would we have to worry about it.
I don't know if that's true, Fred, because we've I don't know, are there any attorneys in the audience, tax attorneys?
Well,
My
the state
understanding-
of Washington just tried to pass a law this session, specifically just to subject the bitumen to state taxing authority.
That's because, that's, I think, a different issue. This is, of course, federal law. The state issue is that
They
the
can't do it by
bitumen is
pipe.
passing through the state, and it's being loaded onto terminals, theoretically. And so because there's this thing called the right of innocent passage, because it's not being modified or offloaded or refined in the state of Washington, the state has no taxing authority over that product. It's just passing through, either in a pipeline or in a train, being loaded onto a terminal or onto a ship and then being shipped, say, to Asia. And so the state sees no revenue from that. This is a little different. This is the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, and if you...
The sentence above defines.
Crude oil does not include shale oil, liquids from coal, tar sands, or biomass or refined oil. So, my understanding is that
Okay, we're gonna look into
this excludes the dilbit products, but now I'm going to check.
Does it exclude the Bakken crude?
No.
Can you give us any background on who in Congress pushed for this
Well,
definition?
I have not dived into that particular issue, but it is interesting that all specific references have been redacted from the IRS memo. It's the company, and they refer to a state and state number 2 and a product. So it's not clear where this came from. But
Well, it was a congressional action that defined it, so where did that come from?
yeah, I don't know the answer to that question.
It's an IRS ruling, not a congressional finding, isn't it?
Well, if you look at this, the House report, and they're basing their interpretation of what the intent of Congress was. Okay, so these are bottom lines. Boy, we are plowing, not making very good progress on getting through this stuff quickly, but it's important. It's important. So these are the bottom lines, at least from my perspective, of oil sands products. And floater sink, we sort of beat that one down. It floats when fresh, but in the real world it seems to be, it has some propensity to sink. Inhalation hazard, and This is something that I keep directing towards Julie, because the people who respond to spills of this stuff and the general public need to be concerned about the fact that diluent piece comes off in, the quote that I heard was, it comes off in a puff. It comes off very quickly, and what's in that puff, it's stuff like benzene, which is nasty. It's a carcinogen, and so there's potential for occupational exposure and potentially even some concern about explosion if it's in a more confined space.
So you'd be doing continual air monitoring?
Yes.
Not just initial?
Yes. Corrosion, we haven't talked about that. There have been questions about whether oil sands products are more corrosive in the pipeline, and the information that I've seen out of the labs indicates that it's not, and I will state this carefully, it's not any more corrosive than the other crude oil products that are coming out of Alberta. You know, the pipeline people wouldn't want to put something into their pipelines that is going to eat them up from the inside out. So they have criteria for water content and acidity and sediment content that have to be met before any of the stuff can be pushed through. So they have an interest in making sure that their pipelines are intact for as long as possible. Toxicity, we haven't really taken a good look at this stuff, but if you consider the bitumen, I haven't been able to find anything that indicates it's more toxic. You know, there's that smothering potential if it does sink. The diluent may be more acutely toxic on its own. One of the issues related to diluents is that they're proprietary. We don't know exactly what's in them. And then the policy issue we just touched on too. And there is this state concern about the fact that they can't tax the stuff as it passes through. So that gets us to the Bakken, and we'll try to go a little bit more quickly through. This is, I just got this sample of Bakken oil. You can see it's very different from the tar sands oil, very light stuff, watery. This is the mayor of Williston, North Dakota, which is kind of the center of activity for producing this. This is an interesting animation that shows the growth of production in Montana and North Dakota. North Dakota, of course, is the center of activity for Bakken crude. You can see the year up at the top right, and then this graph down here shows the production activity and how it really grew between, say, 2007 and the present. So that shows you, what fracking has done for us in terms of improving the accessibility of these previously unmarketable reserves. Here's another way to show this. Of course, this is the United States at night. You can see the major population centers in this satellite photo. You look here in the midsection, the upper north central part of the U.S. See Minneapolis, St. Paul down here, and then over there is North Dakota, and all of that light is coming from the gas flaring activities in the oil fields of North Dakota. They don't have any way to transport gas out of the oil fields, so they're flaring it all off.
How does Washington look for lights?
How does it look?
We have there.
You see it up there?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard. I don't have a close-up of Washington itself.
Hopefully we won't see that.
Yeah. Just a shot of where the oil shale reserves are in North America, and the thing that you notice, or I noticed, is that they're kind of in the middle 2/3 of the country. So what does that mean? You need to get it out to the coast or ship it down to the Gulf Coast to get it out to refineries and to markets. And in this case, for Bakken, This is just a plot of the reported pollution incidents, the spill incidents in North Dakota between 2000 and 2013. These are mostly small, but there are a lot of them, and it all goes with the increased production activities that have been going on there. And this is something that I was not aware of before I started pulling materials together for this talk, and that is radioactivity. Now, who would have thought that radioactivity would be an issue with these new oil shipments? But these are, you see a picture of what's called flowback socks, and so when they pump the water down into get the oil, it comes back up again, and that water is filtered, you get wastewater, but then you get sediment material that's captured in these flowback socks, and they're radioactive. And they exceed tolerances or the criteria for disposal in North Dakota landfills, and so now the state of North Dakota is struggling with what do you do with these things, and the issue has been that people are just chucking them. They're just abandoning them. You can see these are just garbage sacks full of these flowback socks, and they're finding them in just out-of-the-way places. Sometimes some of the trucks that come through to make landfill deposits set off radiation alarms. So it's one of those unanticipated consequences of this increased production of pocket oil. But, trains, that's really, it gets to the heart of what we've been concerned about, and again, kind of a similar diagram to what we saw with pipelines, but this is from Burlington Northern, and you can see their point here. Our network is well positioned to serve major energy regions and reach key markets. And that's sort of the bottom line for all of this new transportation infrastructure. This is not new transportation infrastructure, but existing infrastructure. And you can see from Williston, North Dakota, there's kind of a direct westward line that runs through Spokane that could conceivably distribute Bakken oil to the Pacific Northwest.
It does.
Yes, it already does.
Is it radioactive?
I don't believe the oil is. That radioactivity comes from the so-called natural radioactivity of the mineral material that somehow gets concentrated when the sediment gets brought back to the surface. So that remains in those socks. So, they're radioactive dumpsters, but the oil itself doesn't seem to be. So the spill and the accidents that we've had with Bakken are recent. If I'd given this talk a year ago, we wouldn't have much to talk about in terms of actual incidents. We wouldn't have anything to talk about, actually. But there have been some interesting ones, some tragic ones, and recently one on water that we can talk about. So these two in North Dakota happened late last year. You can see one was a pipeline spill, the other was a train derailment. Here's the pipeline spill. Fortunately, or I guess not for the farmer, but for resource managers, it happened in an agricultural field. You can see it affected a pretty large area. The interesting thing I just read in a news article is that it's going to take 2 years to clean this up. They burned off the oil that was at the surface. As you can see, as you saw in the oil sample, it's really light stuff. It burns readily. Unfortunately, the oil penetrated deeper into the soil here, and so just burning the surface didn't get much of it. This was that train derailment in Castleton. This was a trainload of soybeans that somehow ran into a unit train full of Bakken oil, and there's this commonality of incendiary photographs that we see with Bakken oil. Very impressive mushroom cloud from the train accident. Fortunately, nobody was injured in this. And then, again, the big one for Bakken oil occurred in Quebec at Lac Mégantic. last July, and in this case, 47 people were killed. And big tragedy. It was a unit train that was parked outside of the town, and the brakes cut loose, and it rolled uncontrolled down the hill into the city. There was a bend in the railroad tracks right at the downtown, and it jumped the tracks, ran into a nightclub, and blew up. And that's what it looked like initially. What it looked like the next day. And then you can see the level of devastation that was caused by this particular incident. So that has brought a lot of focus to the safety of rail cars. We haven't heard the last about this. There are a lot of rail cars out there now that are shipping oil because you don't have to get pipeline permits. You don't have to get permits for new construction. All those rail lines are already approved. All you need to do is put more cars on there and you can ship the oil. So there are 92,000 of the old stock, or of these tank cars out there for transporting crude oil. But the safer style, there are only 14,000 out of those 92,000 that are the new style. And I suspect that with the spate of new accidents related to Bakken oil, we may see some increased design considerations for these tank cars. Lucky for you, we had our first known large release of Bakken oil into a body of water. So we can talk about, instead of what happens when you spill it or blow it up, we can talk about what happens when you spill it onto a body of water. Just 3 weeks ago, we had a spill on the Mississippi River where a barge had a collision and spilled about 32,000 gallons of Bakken oil into the Mississippi between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. You can see that only 95 gallons was recovered. And these are the things we look at in terms of trying to gauge the effectiveness of recovery. And then environmental impacts, no fish kills were observed, and no shoreline cleanup, and we'll talk about that. The other thing is very high benzene vapor concentrations were encountered right around the barge. So here are some shots of that spill. The top two show the aftermath of the barge spill itself. You can see the fresh oil here. I suspect that's where they recovered most of the oil. But the stuff that got away and down the river was just silvery sheen, and there's not much you can do with that in terms of recovery. Yes?
That's basically a gasoline spill, isn't it? I mean, that stuff is very light end, and it behaves about the same way.
Funny you should put it that way, because the Canada Transportation Safety Board, in looking at the Lac Mégantic train explosion, took some samples of that oil and did some very good physical analyses of that oil. And this is from the perspective of flammability. They looked at the flash point and said that it was comparable to unleaded gasoline. So that's unusual for a crude oil. This was just to show the consistency. You saw it in the sample, and then another close-up shot of what it looked like along the shoreline. So very difficult to recover. And
I was just thinking, so it's like cleaning up a large concentration of gasoline, so they were in level A personal protection equipment to do that?
Well, I don't know if they were downstream. The benzene spike was around the barge itself, but it was in a big radius around the barge, like a football field, 300 feet.
So they were working on that.
Yeah.
How high was the spike?
Well, I don't have the actual numbers, the anecdotal information, and it's on the summary slide I've got for Bakken. I'll show you the just sort of the anecdotal quote for how high it was. And here it is. So if you look at the inhalation hazard, Coast Guard strike team did the air monitoring around that barge. They said that the levels were in the thousands of parts per million, as far as 300 feet away. And again, talking about the consistency of the stuff, this is what our NOAA people said. It was like gasoline with 2-cycle oil mixed in with it. So very different kind of crude oil than what we're used to here. You know, we think about Alaska North Slope crude that's been coming in forever to Cherry Point. This is very different. And there was no shoreline cleanup because there was no recoverable residue. There was kind of this film on the shoreline, but nothing you could do to pick it up.
But that is not to say there aren't PAHs seeping into the soil and causing toxicity.
That's correct. And with something this light, I asked our folks if there were any fish kills observed, and they didn't see anything. They said that doesn't mean they didn't happen.
How did they recover it? Were they just using absorbent material? I mean, if it's that light?
95 gallons out of 32,000 gallons.
How did
so-
they get that 95 gallons?
Oh, you know, that's a good question. I'm
Must
not
have been
exactly
absorbents.
sure what they used right alongside the barge. Yeah, I can find that out though.
Thank you.
So, you know, there are other issues related to Bakken and this whole notion of fracking. There's that wastewater that's produced when the water comes up to the surface, and what do you do with that? Well, they want to start shipping it around our waterways, and I don't know where it's going to go. Some of the wastewater has been, from what I hear on the radio, it's been processed in water treatment plants, but I don't know if water treatment plants are really equipped to process this kind of material. The other thing that came up related to fracking fluids is, first of all, fracking fluids, the stuff that they pump down there initially is proprietary. You don't know what's in it. Of course, largely water, but there are all these other things that they mix in. And so Hinkenluper from Colorado was testifying before Congress and said that this stuff is so benign that we drank it. And Al Franken, who used to be a comedian, is now a senator from Minnesota, hasn't lost his sense of humor. He asked if the experience was part of some bizarre occult practice. And then the other thing, in looking for information, this showed up. I thought it actually was an old cola advertisement, but you can see it refers to Governor Hinkenluper, so it's obviously well done satire. This is just a quick summary. Of response hazards that was put together by the Washington Department of Ecology, and it sort of captures the real bottom line for people like Julie. Fire and explosion hazard for dilbit and Bakken crude, and then the benzene issues they are aware of, and they will, the state will monitor this stuff carefully if we have an incident that involves either of those two. Coal, let me blast through this. You know a lot about coal. Used to be that people knew intuitively what coal looked like, but we don't use so much in our homes anymore, so I thought I would stick this in my presentation. What we're seeing through here is Powder River Basin coal from Montana, and it's subbituminous coal, which is, let's see if this shows up okay. It's not bad. This is not a very good graphic to begin with, but the idea is just to show what quality subbituminous or Powder River Basin coal is, and it falls in here. So it's kind of a low-grade coal suited for industrial purposes. But again, it's not a pretty process getting this stuff out of the coal seams. This is in the Powder River Basin. And another one of these exponential increase graphs. The very smart people on Orcas yesterday pointed out that we only go to 2011 here, and they thought that maybe these spikes are going to start declining because some of these areas like China are having a harder time with air pollution. But I don't know. I don't have an updated graph for this. And for us, for many of us, the issue is coal trains, and this comes from a These graphics come from a kind of a railroad nerd site, and they were extolling the virtues of these many trains, heavy density of trains coming out of the areas in Wyoming where, Montana and Wyoming, where the coal is produced, and you know, lots of grades and curves on the tracks, and these are all, for me, response nightmares. But, and this is I guess, a relatively updated graphic that shows the status of a number of the coal terminal proposals in our area. You folks, many of you know about this. You can look at some of the graphics that have been produced by Friends of San Juan. This is a coal train. This is one of those coal trains snaking along the curves of the Columbia River. So it's not quite that straight shot shown in that first shot. And this is a coal terminal in Norfolk, Virginia. It looks huge. It is huge. But interestingly, the proposal for Cherry Point lists a potential capacity that matches this terminal in Virginia. So a couple of weeks ago, maybe maybe a month ago, I was asked by the regional response team to answer this question: what are the impacts of coal spill in the water? And I like to point out, and I got in trouble on Orcus yesterday for saying that coal is, after all, a natural material. Maybe I should rephrase that. Coal occurs naturally. There are, of course, seams all over, and this is from an area near the Arctic, in Kotzebue, Alaska. That's a coal beach. It just happens that a coal seam has eroded into a beach, so it's out there. We didn't have anything to do with it. Whether it's causing some sort of shift in the biological communities, I'm not sure. I will ask my friend in NOAA Fisheries who took this shot whether she walked the shoreline, so I don't know if she noted any differences.
Gary, you could add to your pitch that coal was really discovered as sea coal in the beaches of England. So if you go back to 1820, before people really got started, they were running around picking up these black things.
There you go, and they still do that in Cook Inlet up in Alaska. A lot of people comb the beaches for chunks of coal to burn in their stoves. So, you know, whether there's an impact to coal, you know, I think that the jury is still out. You know, maybe it's not so bad, but stay tuned and I'll explain that. I've looked at a number of studies. There was a coal spill in the 1890s near Victoria, and this guy Peter Chapman looked at whether the coal that remained on the bottom was biologically available, and he concluded it was not. And then there's a chemist by the name of Jeff Short who did a lot of analyses for NOAA Fisheries related to the Exxon Valdez spill. And I talked to him about coal, and this is, I lifted this from an email that he sent me because I asked him, why is it, you know, coal has a lot of the same hydrocarbons as oil. How come they aren't as available as they are in oil? And he said that a lot of those hydrocarbons are locked up in the crystalline structure of the coal. So that made some sense to me.
Don't you have to consider, though, that if you're shipping it, you all have, also if there's an accident, have to worry about the fuel oil that the ship has?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we could talk about soybeans or any other sort of cargo. We always worry about the fuel oil on board any of the cargo ships or, you know, cruise lines. And that's one of the big concerns for the Arctic, is that we're seeing all this increase in traffic. It's not necessarily all just related to oil production, but we're going to see more just bulk cargo transport through there, and tourist ships, and any of those things can spill oil that's going to be a big headache. So the thing that occurred to me related to coal is that I've known that coal is enriched in metals. And, you know, if you think about the impacts of burning coal in the Midwest over the last several decades, you know that a lot of mercury and arsenic and lead has been put into the air from burning coal. So you know that the metals are there with the coal. So what happens to those metals in bulk shipments? And I couldn't find much information on this. I did find one EPA reference that said that, if you put rainwater through piles of coal that's stored at terminals and such, you could provide a source to nearby bodies of water. But that was about it. So you think that, this is from South Africa, but you think about the amount of water that might pass through these terminal areas. That's a lot of water and potentially a lot of input of metals into nearby bodies of water. But again, I don't have good information on that yet. And then finally, I talked about these things on KUOW with John Incardona, who's a toxicologist at NOAA Fisheries, and he's done a lot of oil work looking at the impacts of oil at microscopic levels, at biochemical levels. And I mentioned that I didn't think that coal was very biologically available. There was this concern with metals. And he, of course, trashed me and said, well, it's the same hydrocarbons as oil, so they may well be biologically available. And so I felt kind of stupid. But notice it does say here that John Incardona says it wouldn't be too hard to find out if this stuff is biologically available. So I called him on that. I actually called him on the phone and said, well, if it wouldn't take too much, then why don't we do it? So we're going to do it. We're getting a sample of coal from a power plant in Oregon, some Powder River Basin coal. He's going to expose his favorite fish, which are zebrafish, and see if he gets uptake and impacts from that very simple kind of exposure. And then if something turns up, we'll probably pursue it more. But at least we'll have some information as opposed to almost none.
Gary, the coal dock up at Swanson
Yeah.
is a very wind-exposed facility.
Yes.
And there's been studies of, you can see the isobars of coal sediments in the coal dust in the sediments surrounding that facility.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be an interesting natural laboratory for looking at, for long-term deposition of coal in an ambient setting. It also, somewhat coincidentally, the construction of that facility and its operation, shortly thereafter, the range constriction of the Cherry Point herring moved south. So after about 10 years of that operation, a little less than 10 years of that operation, they were no longer found that far north.
Yeah.
And so, but I think it would be, and zebrafish are notoriously robust species. It's what EPA has used for years as a...
Well, he's not trying to kill them, though. He's used zebrafish to determine what is causing issues with larval fish exposure to oil, and he's found that it's cardiac impacts. And he's also used, that's the same sort of approach that he just used for the Deepwater Horizon to demonstrate that bluefin tuna larval fish are exposed by exposure to that oil. It affects their early cardiac development, and that results in a whole bunch of deformities as well as inability to compete.
But he also did brilliant work on the Casco Busan, on herring.
Right,
He did brilliant work on the Casco Busan on herring, which are actually found in these waters, unlike the bluefin tuna and the zebrafish.
Right. But we're talking about, this is sort of a
It's a
handshake
physiological thing,
research
yeah.
project, and so we're going to start with zebrafish. He's got a lot of zebrafish, and he's got...
Well, we'd be happy to provide him with herring if he so desires.
Okay.
Somebody this winter has been measuring small particles, PM 2.5 or something like that, on top of where the trains are going over some of the streets in...
You set me up perfectly. Dan Jaffe from the University of Washington actually crowdfunded a study to look at just that. And I think he's wrapping up his work and is submitted it for publication. So it'll be real interesting to find out I haven't dealt with any of the potential human impacts at all. That's sort of out of our purview, but he is. So this will be an interesting piece to add to the coal story. All right, so we're at the end of my presentation finally, and I just wanted to again refer back to the 25th anniversary of the Exxon Valdez spill. This has been a big part of my life because I first went up there, got my start working oil spills at the Exxon Valdez spill. Yes, that is me.
Nice.
Why is the suit white?
We have done a lot of monitoring, trying to characterize the nature of recovery, at least on the shorelines, over the 25 years. And I just finished writing the draft for a summary of our work, a synthesis of all of that, that of course now is being painstakingly examined back in Washington, D.C. to make sure I haven't said anything that will get me and my agency in trouble. But I did want to at least address some aspects of Prince William Sound and Exxon Valdez. So very quickly, is the oil gone? No. Has Prince William Sound recovered? No. And the herring. Everybody has referred to the herring in Prince William Sound, and it of course is an issue here. It's complicated, we'll get into that in a minute. And then my last shot is irony, and we'll see what I mean. So this is a shot from last month, a month ago actually, in Prince William Sound at a place called Herring Bay. Ironically enough. Is the oil gone? No, it's not gone. There aren't a lot of places like this where you can find oil this fresh, but the fact that you can find oil this fresh anywhere in Prince William Sound a quarter century after the spill has been a big surprise to us. We don't fully understand why it has persisted like this for so long. The good news side of the coin is that there are relatively few places where you find oil like this, but you still find it like this. And has Prince William Sound recovered? It hasn't. There's still a handful of resources that are listed by the trustees, state and federal trustees, as not having recovered. And I think at the top of that list now is the two groups of orcas that use Prince William Sound. This is a shot from 1989 showing orcas right in the vicinity of a skimming operation. We used to think that these guys are so smart that they would simply avoid an oil spill area. Maybe not as smart as herring moving away from the coal terminal. These guys either couldn't avoid it or they just couldn't sense it in the water. The result, and this is a circumstantial story, kind of a CSI story, but it's pretty compelling. Again, there are two groups in Prince William Sound. There's a resident pod called the AD pod, and then there's a transient pod called AT1. And both of those populations crashed after the Exxon Valdez. Typically, marine mammal populations are really stable. They change very little with time, but these crashed. They both crashed after the spill. The resident pod has been making a slow comeback. The transient group hasn't recovered at all. It's been declining steadily, and this guy Craig Mapkin, who has been following these whales since 1985, said that he expects the transient group to go extinct. So that's the outstanding, for me, the outstanding unrecovered resource. And then there's...
Sorry.
No.
Were they leveled before that, or was eating marine mammals already a problem and they were already going downhill?
Well, the data go back to 1985, so look at that. The group that eats marine mammals is this AT1 population, so you can't get any more level than that. It looks like they were just the same for the 5 to 6 years before the spill.
There's plenty of seals and sea lions up there.
Yeah. The resident population feeds on salmon. That's the difference in their feeding patterns. Whether that has affected their recovery, I don't think anybody can say. So herring, there's some, I'm sure you've heard that the herring population and the herring fishery in Prince William Sound crashed after the spill. maybe in similar fashion to the crash of the orcas. It's a much more complicated situation, though. The direct cause of their demise has been identified as a virus. Now, is there a link to the oil spill with that viral infection? And that's the one that's harder to answer, and we don't know for sure. The people at the NOAA Fisheries Lab in Juneau say that we can't directly say that the oil spill was a cause, but we can't rule it out. So maybe the spill compromised their immune capabilities and made them more susceptible to viruses, but I don't know that we'll ever be able to prove that for this population.
NOAA doesn't claim that the killer whales were killed by the spill either, right?
I don't know if NOAA does. I trust, reporters here. I trust this guy Craig Mackin more than I do NOAA because he's been following this group.
Marilyn Delheim did not conclude this, that it was subject to the spill.
Okay,
I think
well,
it's not subject to the natural resource damage assessment.
okay. I still believe.
I completely agree with you. It's just, I
No.
find it incredible that this is one of the few species we actually had pre-spill data.
Right,
And,
right.
and a population that is relatively, a stable, slow changing population, and even still couldn't attribute it to the spill.
Yeah, I know. People are looking for a really strong direct link. This is a circumstantial argument, but to me, it's really compelling. When Craig first said, early on that there were impacts to orcas up there, I was a little skeptical. But when you look at the long-term, and this sort of underscores the value of long-term monitoring, when you look at the long-term trend in these animals, then it's a much stronger argument, I think. Yes?
Suppose you had absolute proof that the oil spill caused the demise of the population of orcas. What would happen? What would anybody do?
Well, if you had absolute proof, then, and if you had it by 1996, then you could have invoked something called the reopener clause in the original spill settlement, which provided for any unanticipated impacts of the spill. It's a $100 million pot of money that Exxon supposedly reserved to pay for damages that were not foreseen in the early years of the spill. But that had to be claimed by 1996. Nobody has linked that pot of money to the orcas. The state and federal trustees invoked the reopener clause with respect to that lingering oil and potential impacts to sea otters and harlequin ducks, but the sea otter researchers just declared the sea otters recovered this year, and the harlequin ducks are not far behind. They haven't announced it yet, but the same sort of conclusion has been found for harlequin ducks. So, and Exxon has been, I don't think there's any other word, has been stalling, and I don't know where this thing is in court, but here we are 25 years later, and it's still an unresolved litigation issue. All right, here's the irony, and then I'm turning it over to Julie. For many years, I thought that this was a mythical product. However, I bought 2 of them on eBay. These are Exxon shipping calendars from 1989, and it features all of the ships in, at that time, the Exxon shipping fleet. And for March 1989, who was the pinup? And look at the admonition at the top there. Take time to be careful. So there's your irony.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay. You warned me not to drone on, and I did, and I'm sorry.
Well, this is great, and we're going to hear now from Julie Knight, and then afterwards, if people still have questions for Gary, there'll be time. Julie has to rush to catch a ferry, but I think Gary will be here a little bit longer.
We have only 20 minutes.
Okay. So while Julie's dragging her show and tell across the floor. Yeah. So Julie Knight is the Executive Director of the Islands Oil Spill Association, or IOSA as it's also known. Uh-oh, that's cut off a little bit. I'll let you guys work on it. Anyways, IOSA is a nonprofit, community-based organization, and their mission is to provide San Juan County with prompt, effective local spill response and prevention, including spill assessment, oil containment, exclusion and removal, and oil wildlife search and rescue. And for 20 years, Julie's been participating in and leading oil spill drills and wildlife rehabilitation trainings throughout the nation. How many? 28 years, wow. And you know, other communities have tried to establish an organization like IOSA and have not been successful. And really, it is Julie's amazing leadership and dedication that has made IOSA the strong and successful organization it is for these many years. And you know, I've been a very strong advocate when I was previously on the county council and still for more spill response capacity in our community and in this region. And yet it's no criticism of IOSA and the spill response community that we have. It's just a recognition that it's not enough for what we're facing, especially with the increased vessel traffic we're looking at. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julie. Thank you very much.
And that's a great link over to the 4 things that I'm covering in 20 minutes, which I think I can do, is why we're here, what we provide, how we can contribute to spills of heavier oil like we're talking about, and then progress in the future. So we definitely are this year working on plans for other things that are strategically placed to help out with this potential threat. Okay, so why we started, it is kind of odd, we're the only community-based response organization in this state or the Northwest really. And the reason we started is because there was a spill, and this is where it was in Westcott Bay, and it was black oil coming in, and this was in 1985. And Coast Guard wasn't able to respond. It was kind of stormy, and later in early evening, late night. And so there were a few island residents that went and did some things, and Dave Kennedy, who was from NOAA, also got some serve pads, talked to the captain of the port and so forth. Oil birds were picked up. But what that led to was a question, and the question was, does the spill response community support the idea of a locally based response organization? And the reason that that was the first question is because the spill response community works as a community. All the pieces fit together. Each of us does something different, and then there are many overlapping functions as well that we all do. So in a larger spill, you may have 4 organizations doing different parts of the same thing. The answer was yes. We have a letter from the captain of the port and others saying, yes, we do think it's a good idea. So that's where we went forward. Okay. I pushed the little, yeah. So again, emphasizing the unified effort, and that when we're working on a spill too, we're all working under the same direction. That's the unified command and from the Emergency Operations Center. And so all the pieces are coordinated, all of our resources are on the same tracking site, all numbered, so that it's not just like, oh, here's this and this and this. There may be 3 different groups working in the same area, and all their resources are tracked by area. And also, for me personally, it goes to, I really appreciate the fact that there is such a strong community in Washington. We're known to be the most friendly and cooperative group as far as response in the country. When you talk to people in other areas, it's mentioned. Okay, now that way. Oh, okay, push the little arrow. Right arrow.
Sorry,
The right arrow.
push the right, the arrow from the left.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Incredible equipment. Okay, so this is, so we got started. So this is what we have now since '88. Assessment for all spills, and we have, it's over
560 spills we've assessed in the islands. All of them have to be assessed on-site, in person, because you just never know what's reported and what is actually happening. And my favorite example is when we had their friendly ferry guys called in and said there's a machine at the ferry dock at Orcas. So Eric Plum, one of our really great responders from Orcas, went and followed it from where he saw it and kept going up current, up current, up current. And it turned out to be a vessel that was unattended, that was pumping. The bilge pump was running, there was a leak in the fuel tank, and all of it was flowing into the boat and then being pumped into the bay, and was just continuing. So because he tracked what was reported to the machine, he was able to turn off the pump, and then we recovered all the oil that was inside the bay there. So that's why, and a lot of them are like an April Douglas fir pollen, with reports of yellow material on the water, all kinds of things, but it's important to assess them all. So anyway, then we do site safety assessment. That's something we've been doing for the last, since 2008. So we have meters that do 5 different gases, including benzene and hydrogen sulfide. And our job that we practice and train for annually is when we're going into a spill site, if it's a larger spill, and this is a statewide or region-wide response, if this is in San Juan County waters, it's our job to go out there and measure where the areas are where there's a concentration that's above acceptable levels and where it's safe to work outside of that. So we're creating a latitude and longitude perimeter. And we continue to do that until other resources arrive, until other contractors arrive, while at the same time we're doing other functions. So that's the second thing. And then obviously spill containment, and this is just such a great, I think Alan's in it too. Perfect. Just an example of containment from last year. And we have 14,300 feet of containment boom stage here in the islands right now. And you can see the yellow going around inside the dock, and then you can see the second layer on the outside. So double containment. And also, in some areas, we were just lining the docks so that nothing got underneath, because if you get underneath all the dock, then it's trapped for a while, and then you've got ongoing mess. So that was done as well. But the thing that was really great about this, again, for all the responses that we've had, so 132 or so that were full responses, we have never had one day where we didn't have enough responders to do the job. Yet all of our responders are coming on volunteer basis. Nobody's paid to be on call except for just me. And we've always had enough people, which is an incredible thing. And so we had 20 people. And then this was very, very satisfying for people who have cleaned up really big messes. You can just see how much fuel there was and how quickly the materials were saturated. But at the end of it, it all looked perfectly clean, which...
Should explain, that's the Roche Harbor fire.
Yes.
Yeah. Alexander.
Vessel that burned and sank at Roche Harbor and released a bunch of fuel. And other interesting floating items. And we were using a Sawzall to cut up some of them so that we could get them out of the water and put them into the disposal area. But the other thing then after that is shore cleanup. So shore cleanup is something that we obviously do for every spill, but in some cases we have just deposits of material. We don't really know where they come from. They're just reported that there's things that have washed up. And I think that that ties in more with the heavy fuels like tar sands, because a lot of what we get, I think, is aged bunker, which I'll show you in a little bit. GRP deployment. We've done all of them except for one, which is Smallpox Bay, which is a pretty easy one, 700 feet across. We will be doing that in the next year, though.
Can you explain what GRP means?
Geographic Response Plan. So it's protection strategy, and I have a little drawing of it. Protection strategies for all the bays that are listed, which is pretty much every bay that you can identify with your eyes. And so we've been doing those actually since 1990, even before the GRP program was started. And Dick Logan years ago started this, and it just spread all over the country. But we had already realized that when we go there, when we try to do something and accomplish a task, we need to have a written plan for what worked and what didn't work, and what the parameters are. So that's a really fun thing that we get to do in our drills. Source removal, that's a great thing too. We've had many cases where we're pumping fuel out of a sunken boat or whatever it is that's in there and preventing the spill, while at the same time containing the vessel. And then wildlife rescue and hazing, which is something that just started this last year, and Val helped us a lot in most of the difficult work in figuring that out. So I have a slide for that coming up. We have a contract with the Coast Guard and also the Department of Ecology response. And so that's some big responders right now. Some of them are not up to date on HAZWOPER, so we keep doing HAZWOPER all the time so we get more up to date people, but there are many response functions where you don't have to be near the oil or right in it, so not everybody has to have HAZWOPER when you're affected. And then 118 spills with all these different things. And this is one, a couple, these represent different things that are important. But this one was two seiners that collided near Fisherman's Griffin Bay, excuse me, and pretty windy, variable direction current. But anyway, the whole content of the tank just was released within the first 5 hours. So we had already called for global diving and salvage to come to pump out those tanks while we were containing and collecting. But by the time they got there, everything in the tank was gone. It had already been released. And so they were pumping water when they got there. So it's just we have an opportunity. We're already right there, and we're able to get there faster. So that's one of the advantages of local response. And then this one is just a funny one. You see that rock and then the boom beside it. That boat hit that rock. And that boat was coming out of that bay at south end of Lopez, Bay, lots of times doing fishing and farming. And the same thing, we had one off False Bay as well, the same thing. Really responsible fishermen knew that that rock was there, but on this one particular night, hit that rock. So we, at one point, thought it was kind of a strange program of having advertising on the rocks, you know, which is, but, I don't know. So, but this was one where we did clean up stuff on the surface initially, but there was also stuff in the tanks, and then Global Diving was able to come up later and pump out the tanks, and it was still there, so they pumped out 600 gallons. And then bunker. We had two spills that lasted for weeks where bunker was coming up all over the shoreline. And these are the out-of-county responses to larger spills that we participated in. And most of them for wildlife, except for Texaco, where we did bring boom over and do some work there. And 1 year, 25, we didn't have a page that was actually a response. We always have pages, but this 1 year we didn't have any need for a physical response. Other than that, we just kept going. And this is setting boom in Blind Bay. You probably recognize that. So the principles are figure out what already exists in the network, what is provided to San Juan County already. And then we've learned about spill response from professional companies that we are associated with or that are friends, and where are their gaps. So that's what we did initially. The resources we already have, it's tremendous what we have for free from this county. Just all the fire stations that let us park trailers there, the marinas that give us free moorage, parking areas. Port Authority Harbor's been amazing for us. So then after that, we acquire the resources that we do need that aren't available. And certainly private responders and their boats is another resource that we receive for free. And as Alan was pointing out initially, our responders aren't paid for training, but when we do respond, then everybody's paid, including their boats.
If it's a paid spill.
Yes, which it always is, because it's either a basic ordering agreement, Coast Guard covers it, or the responsive party covers it. So it should always be paid. And working relationships with everybody, and we do have many friends and advisors in the response community, not only in Washington, but in other parts of the country. And that is a huge gift to us. And the same standards as everybody else as far as the professional all the contractors have the same rules that they follow. Okay, so one of my favorite things, GRPs. So all the places where the black arrows are, those are all places where GRPs, geographic response plans, that's pre-planned exclusion booming to keep oil from going into a bay. So when there's a large spill, what you do is, let's say you have one coming off of Stewart, a likely place in the scenario we're talking about, you start at the place that's most likely to be hit first, and you just keep going until you cover the whole area. So the scenario for the west side, we have, like I said, practiced in all of these. We have boom stored on Stewart, that's why the yellow X is there. We have boom stored on Sucha, which didn't get an X. Roach Harbor has boom, and two places also on Friday Harbor. So those are trailers, so you can pull them to whatever access point is closest. And I was thinking through, a couple nights ago, after Gary first talked, I was thinking through, all the places where we could launch boom from the west side just through access points. And we have permission for two access points in Falls Bay. We can do Smallpox Bay, obviously Mitchell Bay, Westcott Bay, Roach Harbor. And we're also looking for some in between that we can get permission for ahead of time that are really good and easy to do. But that's what we did with two seiners off the west side. That unfortunately one of them, some people got injured as well. Is we had just parked right there at Mar Vista, pulled it out, was out on site within 20 minutes. So, and the black things are where we've done field tests, like I said, all those areas. Most of them, many times, like Falls Bay 6 times, Westcott Bay about 5 times. I'm done. Okay. So, rock bolts also. We also have rock bolts marked on that. So in many places where you don't have a good shore attachment, you can see right here just the steep rocky cliff where the main force of the flood tide hits. There's goose barnacles there, it's kind of high energy. So we have 2 or 3 rock bolts there and a cable in between the two that you can slide the boom up and down as the tide changes. And then also the other thing is, one of the advantages of local response that you get to have is that you get to work on the same places that that are part of your everyday existence. But you get to learn about how the tide works on different exchanges in different parts of the month, and also test it and test it and test it. And we have the advantage of one guy who lives here at Falls Bay, and then also just trying different things. And finally, after the 3rd drill, this is what we came up with, and this coincides best with what the current already wants to do. So we're working with the current to direct it to that apex. Then there's a guy who lives on a house right above that point, and we have permission to go down his driveway and down the hill there, and to pump fuel or oil, whatever we need to do from there up, and then transportation out. So it's private property access that's helped us. And that's why I mentioned also access launching viewpoints. And we have about 150 in the islands, which isn't, we need to have more. It's good, but it's not as good as we'd like. And so when we were on Orcas yesterday, it seems like last week or something, I was talking with people about, part of our application, we just turned in a grant application for the west side of Orcas. And that will include some funding to put time into that whole west side of Orcas and access points, because we don't have much there. It's kind of spread out. And where we can launch from and getting that really nailed down. And we're going to have a drill there as well on the west side. So access, launch, and viewpoints, and that is something that will help us when we're trying to do shoreline cleanup for tar, patty, bunker, whatever it is that washes ashore in the county. There's a nice rock bolt. You can really understand why you need a rock bolt right there, because what else could you hold on to that would be solid? That's Sucha Fox Boat. And then training, just diversity, potpourri of things, but 2 different skimmers are running, and then we've set the exclusion strategy from Argyle Lagoons in the back there. We set a rock bolt in there. We have IOS boats, we have responder boats, and working on, actually this little crew here is working on shore attachments with fence posts, stakes, and tied together, and fancy little contraption that we have. This is the hazing overview from Rex, who's a pilot that flies another in-kind contribution. He flies for free every time we have a drill, takes photos overhead, so we can see where the boom is in the water, and really get angles that you can't see looking across the water. And so we were trying to be lined up here like this, and with the scenario that the rails were coming up channel, but also trying to be in a place where rails weren't on that day. So we looked by plane and by boat to make sure that they weren't in there, so it didn't bother them. But and then Val was positioned over this way, and then was listening to the sounds that we were making and analyzing them. Is that correct? Way of saying it? Okay. And then Ken, who's one of Harry's good buddies, he's an excellent example of safety because he has his earplugs on and he has his hammer tied to his gear and everything. But so he's just banging on the pipe, and different ways of banging on it. We're learning to do that a little bit better. We're going to try again this year, and then there's a bunch of pipes in the trailer. And this is just, for me, one of the happiest slides because, obviously this is Westcott Bay where we started from. The strategy here, with 1,300 feet to exclude from Garrison Bay, 2,300 from Westcott Bay, which was back here, and this is the entrance channel in Horseshoe Bay. In the entrance channel, we had not tried this before, but we did the last 2 drills here, and we used some of the 30-inch boom, which is bigger boom, which was donated to us. And we have 4 of these, so the one that's missing is right here. So one, if it goes under here, it's getting slower here, and you can stop it here. But in this case, the stuff that we put in to simulate oil actually did stop right at the apex of this E, which on an incoming tide of strong flood was a really great thing to see because we didn't know if that would happen. So that gives us another option to keep it from going further into Westcott Bay. And I think, that also, I think, is a great thing. So this is during our drill, but we were kind of far away. We were at this point where we just stand back and look at everything, and this little seal went and rested on our boom. That's like Dave Sawicki, who retired from BP recently, but he's just a great guy. When he ran their response program, he has this photo on his desktop also because he likes it so much. Okay, and then this is just a kind of conclusion as far as why we're here and what the value is. There's many things we can't do and many things we can do, and that's the point. And this is a combination of one of the things that we can do best. We have oil company contractor, we have MSRC, we have state parks, we have salvage company, local salvage company, we have IOSA boats, we have privately owned boats that are IOSA responders. And when you look at all the different bays and where people live and how well they know their bay versus the bay, over on Mesa, whatever it is, they have knowledge that nobody else has. And all of that knowledge is put together when we do drills and training, and it's documented. So we have this advantage of this local knowledge that we can apply. And it's not written down, but when you learn it, everybody talks, everybody shares, and then you write down what you know. And then it's also shared statewide. And everybody offers something different. So there's some things we can do, some things we can't, and some things we all do that's in common. And also, I always say, because people say, it's so discouraging when people talk about big spills and that you can't do everything. But for us, doing something, getting something done is way better than doing nothing. So that's our way we look at it. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is the things that we can do and in heavy oil situations. So first of all, the site safety assessment. So we're just thinking of these big tar patties coming in and some incident in the Strait of Juan, or Herald Strait, rather say. Site safety assessment. Our role is actually by contract to go out and do a site safety assessment within the first hour before other companies and organizations are coming from elsewhere because they will be there later. And when they arrive, they want to make sure that the location where we can and cannot work is defined so they can start right away. Nobody wants to be just kind of in a stall position because they have to do all these measurements and they can't start putting equipment in the water. Then our other obligation is to deliver 3,000 feet of boom to the site during that initial same 2 and 3 hour window. Also setting GRP, so after that, if we would set the next closest GRP that's down current of the spill, and then just keep going. Of course, by then we'd expect other people to be there, but that would still be a roll, and those would all be shared. And so each, like, we might be signed 3 days, another company might be signed 3 days. Okay, and then wildlife search and rescue. At the same time we would be doing that, we know this through EOC drills, Emergency Operations Center drills, which we do at least 3-4 times a year on the mainland. So another part of the group would be to search and rescue, surveys for wildlife, and maybe whale hazing, depending on, that would be authorized through NOAA. And then the wildlife response unit, we also have an obligation to set up in the first 24 hours a mobile unit that's like a MASH unit, like they had on the show MASH, those white Western shelter tents. And there's a whole facility with all the equipment that's put together by MSRC, and we are the crew that works with them to get it set up. So functions. And then last thing is what we do with heavier oil that's coming on the shore. The Access Launch and Viewpoint Network that, I don't think I have a map of it. Oh, I do. Wow. So I even forget your own slides. Okay, so we have these maps for the different islands, just the major ones. We need to have them for more. And so these are all the access points. When heavy oil comes up, like this one right here, this is one of many. We picked up, I think it was 4,000 pounds of these in one spill here in the island. And you can see that it's quite heavy, and it's big. This is what it looks like. Not that heavy. 35 pounds. Pass it around, you know. I love this thing. So it doesn't smell anymore because we did this in 2000, so it's safe. But you know, it's still, if you got it in a really, really warm room, it would kind of wiggle around a little bit and change shape. But it's heavy. I mean, so what these things do is they come in on depletion beaches. So the ones where you're getting deposits all the time, like the south side of Spencer's Spit, you know, or like Jackson Beach. All the ones like when there's fishing in the area, we've got fish native, wherever, I'm not going to pass the plane, but when we have surges of fishermen coming into the area, you find like ham sandwiches and plastic wrappers and potato chips on the beach. I mean, I've spent some time just going out and cleaning those at a certain time of year, because those are the kind of beaches where you'll get deposits of incoming. So there's stuff that's floating in the water or just under the surface, which is the case with these, just under the surface. And then all of a sudden you'll get these reports. Oh, there's a bunch of tar packs on this one beach. And then there's one at Hughes Bay, but not Alec and McCardle. And there's one over by Richardson's Fuel. This is really what happened. And so we figure the best way is to have this network of people in the islands. So we have our Access Launch and Viewpoint, but to extend that and say just go out and look in your area, because every day is different. And if you have, obviously if you have a tide that's rising, you know, it may go out. If you have a tide that's receding, it may be deposited, and the next time you get a flood, it's lower, so it's going to stay there. So it depends on if rising or lowering tide. But that is something that we have a network of people in communities that can do that. They can even just look. That speeds up getting them out of there before they go back in the water. So that's our Access Launch and Viewpoint. And then how people can help. So did I miss something here? Oh, I don't think I did. Okay, so Access Launch and Viewpoints, supporting functions. So there's some functions in spills that don't involve getting oil, like support functions, and transport and staging, towing things with their trucks. All that stuff speeds up the response. West side locations, we do need more information on west side locations for San Juan and for Orcas. Also Stewart and Sioux Chief, especially Stewart. We need more there. Right now we have Lisa Lamb on Stewart, who's like the queen of Stewart Island. And then also things, financial support for just getting more west side equipment and supplies. We are working on getting some things staged in a couple more locations on the west side and having more equipment to put there. And training to be a responder. So those are all the ways community members participate. And that's 25 minutes. Okay, you're welcome.
I just want to really quickly bring your handouts we have in the back of the room. And thanks to Sean for her incredible graphic art talents, and to the Friends of San Juan's who did the printing. But this handout shows some slides from the Kinder Morgan application for their project. And Sean's done a little blow up so you can see more clearly the impact of the islands. And this is a spill simulation, and it shows how much our islands would be impacted if there were a spill from one of these tanker vessels transporting the Canadian diluted bitumen that Gary told us about through our water. So there's that handout there. And then this other handout, on the back, it has some things what you can do. And there's a website you can go to learn more about our geographic response plans that Julie was telling us about, and IOSA's contact information. And as she said, if any of you are interested in becoming involved and participating as a volunteer, there's a sign-up sheet in the back, yep. And as Julie said, there are some activities, if you want to be involved as a volunteer in helping to deal with a spill, you have to get trained first. And training is offered, and so it'd be good if that's of interest to you to sign up and become involved. And then we're really advocating people to contact our governor and the Coast Guard and really find out, if you're a shoreline property owner or if you have a favorite shoreline area that you like to visit, find out what the plan is for getting that thoroughly cleaned up if there is a spill, and making sure that funding is guaranteed to do the cleanup that would need to be done. And you can look at these maps here and see where you are and how that might relate in the event of one of these spill scenarios that the Kinder Morgan project talks about. We have contact information for our state representatives. The legislative session just ended, and unfortunately there were some bills they were looking at that dealt with oil spills issues that did not get passed. But the opportunity to advocate this year has ended, so we'll have to work on that next year. But I think continued advocacy for better regulations and more funding for spill prevention and response resources is important. And then upcoming events, the Friends of the San Juans with some organizations up in Canada is going to do a drift card drop actually on the day of the 25th anniversary of the Exxon Valdez spill, March 24th. And these are going to be pink cards. And so anytime that day or after, walk your beaches and look for them. Oh, all right, Donna has a...
I don't have the print on them yet.
Okay, but you're going to be looking for pink.
This is what the card will look like.
Okay. And then this coming Tuesday, on the 18th, the Friday Harbor Film Festival is going to have a screening of Black Wave, the documentary about the legacy of the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and it's going to be right here at the Grange Hall. This coming Tuesday, 7 p.m. Admission is by donation. And then finally, it's not enough to just say no to the transport of fossil fuels through our waters. We need to find ways to say yes, and there is an energy fair coming up that'll give you lots of information about energy conservation and renewable energies. And on this island, it's going to be on Saturday, May 17th. And it's going to be at the, where Mi Casita used to be, the Victorian house there in downtown. So I hope everybody will attend that. And with that, thank you all for coming, and please stick around, have some refreshments, and visit with our presenters, and thank you for being here.